Welcome to another episode of Pixelated and presents Nostalgialess. Today's game is Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. Specifically, I'll be looking at the GOG.com PC version of the game, though it was also released for the PlayStation 1 and Dreamcast, the latter being the definitive release of the game. Developed by Crystal Dynamics of Tomb Raider fame, and published by Eidos Interactive of Deus Ex fame, Soul Reaver is the second game in the Legacy of Kain series. It was originally being developed by Crystal Dynamics as an entirely different game called Shifter. The premise was that you played a fallen angel, cast out and doomed to an undeath. You were able to phase between the physical and spiritual world, and you can use the tattered remains of your wings to glide. Your mission was to destroy your brothers that had cast you out and were now hunting you, and then destroy the false god that you all worshipped. Silicon Knights of X-Men Destiny fame approached Crystal Dynamics and offered them the opportunity to develop a sequel to the Silicon Knights game, Legacy of Kain Blood Omen. Crystal Dynamics jumped at the idea, and since the only work that had been done on Shifter was on paper, they began converting the game over to the Legacy of Kain mythos. Sadly, the relationship between Silicon Knights and Crystal Dynamics ended before the release of Soul Reaver, and Silicon Knights filed an injunction due to Crystal Dynamics using some of their research. This led to delays and problems for Soul Reaver, eventually forcing Crystal Dynamics to split the game into two games, Soul Reaver 1 and 2. Soul Reaver suffered a bit because of this, as many things were cut, including numerous elemental Reaver enhancements, and Turl, the final brother of Raziel, who was completely ignored in Soul Reaver. The rest of the story, Raziel continuing to follow Kain in an attempt to exact revenge, is in Soul Reaver 2. The story of Soul Reaver follows Blood Omen, but centuries later. Kain has taken over the world instead of saving it, and he has surrounded himself with vampire children. Every few centuries, Kain goes into stasis and emerges with a new vampiric gift or mutation. But one day, our quote-unquote hero, Raziel, grows wings before Kain. This leads to Kain ripping them off and tossing him into the Vortex, a whirlpool of water that seemingly never ends. Water is anathema to vampires, so it's pretty much a death sentence. Raziel awakens many centuries later at the bottom of the ocean, in the spirit world, with a much ravaged body. A mysterious being known only as the Elder God awakens Raziel and tells him that he has been transformed, that Kain's selfishness has led to the decline of Nosgoth, and that Raziel must hunt down his former brothers in order to become strong enough to defeat his former master Kain. This sets Raziel off on his mission, and believe me when I say that the story is the single best part of any Legacy of Kain game. As for the gameplay, it's a mixed bag. Raziel can attack with his fists or any weapon he happens to have, he can jump, glide with his wing flaps, cast a handful of spells, and shift between the spectral and material worlds. That all sounds great, but it's the details that hurt the game most. For instance, you can attack with one button with a single 3-attack combo. That's all. You can pull torches off the walls and use them to burn vampires, or grab a spear from a fence and use it to impale a vampire with. That's all extremely cool, but the problem is that you can't kill any vampires if you don't have a weapon on hand. This can be solved if, once you got the Soul Reaver, you could actually use it when you needed it. Instead, one hit in the material world and you lose the ability to use the Soul Reaver at all. It's possibly the universe's most useless melee weapon. Still, it looks cool and it sounds like a lightsaber, so it's got some redeeming qualities. Aside from that, combat is extremely simple. You can't block, you can't conveniently dodge, and the few spells you get, if you manage to get them at all, are completely useless. What do I mean by managing to get them? Well, all of the spells, with the exception of transporting to the spirit world, come from power-ups you can find in the world. The problem is that you can't access them even if you know where to go, since you need to have certain abilities unlocked by beating and eating the souls of your brothers to do so. For instance, you get the ability to climb certain walls or the ability to swim in water without going into the spirit world. So, once you get these abilities, you're forced to backtrack and explore quite a bit in the hopes that you manage to find the right path to the power-up, and that you don't run into a dead end halfway through due to not having another power-up that you need, and you might manage to unlock a few spells. Unfortunately, the spells are useless. Most of them won't kill the vampires, just stun them, and you have to press enter, go into the spells menu, select the spell you want, and cast it. At least it's an AoE effect, and you can use it to stun enemies and then use the Soul Reaver to kill them without getting hit and losing it. The best spell you have is the one that you get at the very beginning, allowing you to transfer into the spirit realm at will. The things in the spirit world are very similar to the material world, but their proportions and shapes are slightly altered. This allows you to solve some puzzles in the game by transferring to the spirit realm and getting to otherwise impossible to reach locations. Unfortunately, to go back to the material world, you have to find a portal location, which means that the game is limited in its ability to create interesting puzzles. Or maybe they just didn't have enough time to make the puzzles better. As it is, most of them don't involve the shifting mechanic. In fact, Almost all of the puzzles in the game are simple block moving / flipping puzzles. There are a few puzzles that use the shift ability, and once you get the constrict ability, to the last area of the game, every puzzle is a constrict based puzzle. Sadly, that leaves the vast majority of the puzzles as simple block puzzles that get old pretty quickly. As for the bosses, while the story behind them is really engrossing, the boss fights themselves are extremely easy. This is due in part because Raziel can't die. At worst, you go back to the beginning area of the game and can teleport back to the boss, or near enough that you can continue. Mostly though, you just go to the spirit realm, heal up, and go back to the material realm to continue the fight. Some of the boss fights are more puzzles than actual fights, and only one is extremely hard. The second to last boss is invulnerable to all attacks. There is absolutely only one way to kill him, and if you don't know it, you would have an insanely hard time figuring it out. Basically, you must run from the boss through 5 rooms, and if you get too far away from the boss, he resets. This would lead most people to believe that you can't lead the boss anywhere, even if they thought to do it in the first place. Once you get the boss back to the furnace room, all you have to do is turn a wheel and then pull a lever and the boss dies. That means that he is the single easiest boss after you've figured it out, and the single hardest one until you do. The biggest problem with the game though is the size of the world and the lack of any direction. Most of my playtime was spent wandering around and trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to be doing. This is my major complaint with the game, that the pacing is almost non-existent for long periods due to the game giving you no help on where to go or what to do. Even the portal that allows you to travel between areas doesn't help much, as all of the icons are random symbols that, unless you write them down when you find them, you probably are never going to remember what the symbol stands for. And don't you dare take a couple of days off from playing the game, or you might as well start the entire thing over, as you aren't likely to have any go-around idea what you were doing. Graphics-wise, the game is astounding, mostly. The game came out in the early days of 3D, and as such, everything is extremely polygonal, and there is no such thing as a curve. Still, given that, the game looks pretty damn good today. The textures are a little muddy by today's standards, but the art direction is astounding, and the animations are some of the best I've ever seen, even from newer games. The graphics and light actually change from the material realm to the spirit realm, and the buildings and enemies become more twisted and wretched looking. It's worth noting that while the PC and PlayStation versions have muddy textures, the Dreamcast port receives significantly better textures, making it the recommended version of the game. The sound effects are amazing, including the voice acting being some of the best in the industry, and the death sounds of the vampires being pretty gruesome. Sadly, the PC version has terrible music. It's just one song, loop no matter where you are. This wasn't a problem on the Dreamcast or the PlayStation versions of the game, only the PC version, which is a massive disappointment. The final part I must mention, that most people know by now, is that the game simply doesn't end. You find Kain, have a quick fight with him, and then he gets away, and the words "to be continued" appear on the screen. I hear people flip their shit over this, and I think I would have too if I played it when it first came out. With video games, you really have no idea if you're going to get to do a sequel, and if so, how long it's going to take. So seeing this must have been like telling people, "I'm sorry, you're probably never going to get to see what the hell happens next." Luckily, I'm playing it in 2013, and I have the sequel just sitting on my hard drive waiting for me. All of this aside, I still enjoyed my time with the game. Any Legacy of Kain game is worth playing for the story and atmosphere alone, but Soul Reaver can sometimes be hard to enjoy. Its combat is fun enough, though extremely shallow. The puzzles are fun for a while, but the repetitive nature of the block puzzles burns out pretty quickly. The exploration would be fun if they gave you an in-game map, but without that, it's extremely hard to figure out where you're supposed to be going or what you're supposed to be doing. Luckily, the negatives and positives combine to create an overall enjoyable experience. If you've never played a Legacy of Kain game, you could start with Blood Omen, or you could easily start with Soul Reaver and be just as happy. While I can't say that this game is for everyone, it's still enjoyable enough that I recommend it for anyone who likes 3D puzzle action games in the vein of Tomb Raider, or for a fan of dark vampire stories.